We're going to make America great again. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Donald Trump speaking live in Florida, having cast his ballot at a recreation center in Palm Beach, Florida, and a rare sighting of the former First Lady Melania Trump at his side. Donald Trump saying that, so far, I hear we're doing very well. He went on to tell reporters, I've been very honored to find out lines are long. The conservative lines, he said, the Republican line seems conservatives are voting very powerfully, adding, so far, I think it's been fair. This is how we begin our coverage today. At high noon on the East Coast, I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines on a special edition of Balance of Power. Welcome to Election Day. Kaylee, we made it. After many twists and turns in this campaign, there's no more campaigning, only time to vote.
Indeed, as we have just seen Donald Trump do. Kamala Harris, of course, has also ended her campaign. She will be in D.C. while Donald Trump is in Florida this evening as we all wait for the tally to come in. At this point, it is no longer about trying to convince American voters who to vote for. It's just showing up to vote at all.
That's right.
If they decide to do so today, keeping in mind that to tabulate all of these votes, to get that final tally could take some time, knowing that more than 80 million Americans voted early before this election day.
That's absolutely right. It's staggering number here coming off of what we saw during the pandemic. These are numbers that many people never saw coming. Polls could not be tighter. This is an election that we have been set up here with a true tie. It's essentially 50-50 at the top of the ticket, and that goes for a lot of races down ballot as well. Even the voters of Dixville Notch couldn't figure it out, Kaylee. 6 of them, they tied 3-3 after going all in for Joe Biden in 2020.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that at one point in this race, it was Joe Biden that was going to be the Democratic nominee for president. But clearly, a lot has changed. This 2024 election cycle has been unlike any other. And here's a reminder of what we've all been through.
Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. And it's what the 2024 election is all about.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. And we have no choice because November 5th is right around the corner.
Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death. If I had not moved my head at that very last instant, the assassin's bullet would have perfectly hit its mark, and I would not be here tonight.
You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices.
You can always trust me to put country above party and self.
We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression.
America will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than ever before.
We are optimistic and excited about what we can do together.
To think we've gone through all of this together, bringing us now to this moment on Election Day. We start our coverage on the ground with Bloomberg's David Gura, who is in Philadelphia right now. Of course, the big prize tonight, Pennsylvania. And David, we may not know by tomorrow who won it.
That's right, Joe. And so, you know, the weather here is beautiful. I want to say that first of all, and I think that's a positive sign for those who are going to cast their ballots today. This is a state that really put a lot of emphasis on voting early, and the way that's done here is through mail-in ballots. People requested them, they were sent them, they could return them through the Postal Service or go to county offices to bring them back in. Those who didn't do that or didn't do that on time are going to the polls today. And the lines are long across this state. I've been checking in with officials across the state from both parties, Democrats and Republicans, and they say turnout is good. But everyone is acknowledging the fact that this is, as you put it, a razor-thin race at the top of the ticket and all the way down. And we've seen that narrowing in these recent weeks. Looking at those most recent polls, the New York Times Siena College poll, putting this as a dead heat. Looking at the Senate race in this state, we've seen that narrowing as well over these last few weeks. So everyone aware of the stakes here, the importance of Pennsylvania, those 19 electoral college votes, and looking at history, acknowledging the fact that most routes to the presidency do come through this state. And as I was in front of the Philadelphia Art Museum behind me last night, that was a refrain we heard over and over again from speakers who were there on behalf of Vice President Harris, acknowledging the fact that this state is important to that campaign. Of course, you'd hear the same thing from the former President Donald Trump's campaign as well. They both know that this state is crucial.
Well, certainly with its 19 electoral votes. But, David, you mentioned the down-ballot races there we are watching as well, including the incumbent Senator Bob Casey facing a challenger in Dave McCormick, former Bridgewater executive. Is there a sense that someone can win that Senate race if their party does not also win the state at the presidential level?
Republicans certainly hope so, and I mentioned that recent polling. For a while, Senator Casey, the incumbent Democrat, had a 9 percentage point lead in that race. It has narrowed to 5 in that New York Times Siena College poll. And we have seen the way that that race has been framed here come into finer focus in recent days. So there have been kind of small missteps made by Dave McCormick. Him pronouncing Yingling incorrectly was not a good move here at the beginning of the race. But he made some remarks about the Affordable Care Act more recently in a video that was recorded surreptitiously, saying he wasn't in favor of people up to the age of 26 being able to stay on their parents' health care plan. That is something that we've heard Senator Casey bring up time and time again, most recently as last night in that rally here in Philadelphia. It is something that got a lot of applause, him saying that he wanted to keep that provision in place. You know, here in this race, I was in Wisconsin last week. This is an issue that came up there as well. This notion among Republicans that they might revisit the Affordable Care Act, make changes to health care policy in this country is something that Democrats are sort of raising the specter of to say to voters, look, this policy is in place. Republicans who are trying to challenge it could make rather draconian or extreme changes to that piece of legislation. I should say Bob Casey comes from Pennsylvania political royalty. His dad was the governor of this state 2 times. He's a known quantity, not from Philadelphia, but from Scranton. And so he is trying his hardest here to secure that 4th term.
All right, Bloomberg's David Gura live in Pennsylvania on this election day. Thank you so much. And now we want to turn to another part of the Rust Belt, another battleground state we are watching this evening. And that's Michigan, where we find Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick in Detroit. So, Romaine, we remember during the primary season, 100,000 voters in protest choosing not to vote for what was then candidate Joe Biden in Michigan. It's a question of what those 100,000 and the rest of the voters in this state will do today.
Absolutely, and both candidates spent the last final days of their campaign in the state of Michigan really trying to make their case. Of course, Trump closing it out in the early morning hours today in Grand Rapids, Michigan, not even taking the stage until after midnight. While his speech generally hit on some of the main themes that he's been known for through this campaign, he made it clear that voter turnout was going to be a big factor here in the state of Michigan. And there's a big reason why he joined here. While he did joke a little bit here about superstition, he closed out his 2016 and 2020 campaigns in Grand Rapids as well. But Kent County, where Grand Rapids sit, is a potentially big swing county. In fact, when you talk about the swing state of Michigan, most people talk about 2 swing counties. Oakland, the more prosperous county that encompasses the Detroit suburbs, right where I'm standing, and Kent County, a more middle-class area out far west, closer to Lake Michigan. These have become big barometers here for how the state of Michigan goes. Remember, Kent County actually went for Trump back in 2016, though it went for Biden in 2020. It also went for Obama back in 2008 before turning to Romney in 2012. Make of that what you will here, but both candidates, both campaigns feel that they have to win Kent County as well as Oakland County if they want to win Michigan.
Great setup, Romaine. Joining us from the Northwest Activities Center polling location, awfully busy in Detroit today. Romaine Bostick, thank you so much for being in the field for us on this election day as we assemble our political panel. Can't have an election day without Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, Republican strategist, and Jeannie Shanzano, Democratic analyst, political science professor at Iona University. Great to see you both here. We finally made it. I just want to know what's going through both of your minds here. We're walking into a race that is absolutely deadlocked. Nobody knows what's about to happen. So how do you watch it, Rick?
I love election days. As a former campaign manager, it was the day that I had to myself. You couldn't buy any more TV, no more rallies, no more mail programs to approve. It's fantastic. You just got to make sure that your ground game's out there, turn out, vote. And I think that's critical. I think we're now in the closest race in modern history. It's the fewest number of targeted states, swing states, and it's got the closest polling in any one of those swing states we've ever seen. So ground game matters. When you interview pollsters, what do you think? What do you think? Ground game. That's when they punt. Forget all the data. It's ground game. And I think that's correct. And so we know that Kamala Harris has invested heavily. She's got thousands of employees all over the country in these targeted states turning out vote. And Donald Trump is relying on Elon Musk. So is Musk the hero of the Republican Party, coming in, swooping in with his dollars and technology and saving the ground game, or not? And so I think that's what's got everybody on edge. So we'll start seeing the results of that earlier tonight.
Well, so as we consider the ground game, Jeannie, that can't really be captured properly in polls necessarily, right? For all of the talk about how tight the margin is in pretty much every poll you look at, whether it's at the national level or in the battleground states, they can't capture enthusiasm and the likelihood of turnout, really.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And what we hear is that 2%, if these polls are off by 2%, that could be the difference between changing this thing, that it's done fast and somebody runs away with it, or it's as tight as we've all been seeing. And, you know, I, too, have been watching how close this is, and it is historically close. But I think the other thing we should remember is what's at stake here, because this is what the campaigns are telling us. On the Republican side, we hear from Donald Trump, the country is over if Kamala Harris wins. And from the Democrats, we hear democracy is over if Donald Trump wins. I mean, those are some high stakes we're hearing from these campaigns. And think about it. Donald Trump, if he loses, is facing jail. If he wins, he'll have probably more power than any modern president in American history. And Kamala Harris, if she wins, breaks all kinds of glass ceilings. Woman, black, Indian. I mean, the stakes could not be higher tonight. And so I, too, love election night. I'm very excited, but I'm also a little bit of anxiety. I think so many voters have, not knowing in the last 2 years we've been hearing so much of what our lives are about is at stake here.
We have no shortage of anxiety at the desk here. I wonder, Rick, your thought on the closings. Kamala Harris on the rocky steps said the momentum is on our side and never publicly for a second day mentioned the name of her opponent. Donald Trump went through a couple of swing states, ended up in Grand Rapids, as Romaine mentioned, referring to her low IQ. The contrast couldn't be greater.
Yeah, one is finishing a campaign that has been framed on negativity. Donald Trump, it's how he campaigns. It's who he is, right? It's all about grievance and retribution. And he hasn't changed that at all. And he has the backing of the economy in his back. He could have focused on how he was going to change that, as he did in his first term in 2016. But he didn't. He went ahead and said, I'm going to be the guy that, you know, ruffles feathers. And I must admit, I think Kamala Harris took a shot at that kind of strategy, right? Coming out of her convention, she went negative on Donald Trump. And I think since then, she's pulled up the rudders. She's now sailing into a very positive close. And I think she does think she has momentum. And being negative is not a good conducive act for being someone with momentum. So what she's trying to do is create excitement, create positivity around her close, obviously surrounded by celebrities and stars and big rallies and entertainment. That is the campaign of someone who thinks they're going to win. Donald Trump is running a campaign that thinks somebody's going to lose.
Wow.
And yet the polls would suggest that neither of those things are abundantly clear at this point. But some of these very same polls, Rick, as we were just discussing with David Gura in Pennsylvania, for example, show that there's wider margins in the down ballot races and the Senate races. And some of these very same battleground states we are talking about, the Democrats are polling far ahead of Kamala Harris. So what does that indicate to you about how things are likely to go?
It's not unusual. I mean, there's usually separation between the presidential candidate and the down ballot. For instance, in 2008, when I ran John McCain's campaign, he ran 9% higher in his ballot than the congressional ballot. In other words, all the people who voted for Republicans in Congress got 9% less votes. So you had almost a 10% vote swing between, you know, the top of the ticket and that down ballot. So it's always sort of, you know, moving around. In the case of the Democrats, it's reverse, where the down ballot's doing better in the state. Now, the question that we all are going to find out tonight is, was there a merging of that ballot? Did Kamala Harris get the benefit of a strong Democratic base in especially these blue wall states that elected 3 popular governors 2 years ago that were significantly higher in the percentages that they got than she's showing right now? If she gets their vote, she wins those 3 states.
I want to get the take of the pollster at the table here with the final calls. John Ralston, Nevada Independent. Harris winning the state by 0.3 of a point. Jackie Rosen, getting back to Rick's point, winning by 5. big gap there. Larry Sabato, who we know from the program quite a bit, Larry's crystal ball predicting Harris winning the blue wall, plus Nevada, Republicans flipping the Senate, Dems flipping the House, and 538 gives Harris a 50% chance of victory. Trump 49. What do you think of these numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never argue with John Ralston out there because he knows what's going on out there. And so those are, very good signs for Rosen. It's been touch and go out there. Larry Sabato as well. I have a lot of Democratic friends who are very anxious right now.
Yeah.
So the scenarios that they're describing are very, very positive. But, it's just really not fair to call these if we're going to believe what the polls say. And I think one of the reckonings we have tomorrow is with the polls. Either they are right on target and this thing goes down to the wire, or they have miscalculated to the degree they did in 2016 and 2020, underestimating Donald Trump's get out the vote. So it's really hard responsibly to say at this point who's ahead and who's behind.
Yeah.
Well, as we consider the group of voters that has voted already is incredibly large. More than 83 million people voted before Election Day of an eligible electorate of just 244 million. Even Donald Trump was referencing this when we just heard him speak in Florida, Jeannie, and the idea that Republicans showed up early to a degree which we did not see in 2020. What does that signal about what we're likely to see as the results begin getting reported tonight?
Yeah, we're probably not going to see as dramatic a mirage effect as we did in 2020, where Democrats voting, Republicans voting same day. So those numbers came in a little later than some of the early vote counts and vice versa out in the West. But, it is interesting. One thing we don't give Donald Trump credit for is the fact that since he has been in our lives politically for the last decade, the voter turnout in this country has increased dramatically. 16, 18, 20, 22, and now it looks like 24. He is the master of the get out the vote, and he is trying this time to do it with young people and young men who aren't likely to get out regularly. But he is very, very good at this get out the vote drive. And he's turned it over to Elon Musk, but, he doesn't really need much help. He's very good at it himself.
Just a minute, Rick. If Donald Trump wins tonight, this will be a very loud message about early voting in the Republican Party and a huge win for the RNC. Who got the party's arms around this?
I think it started a couple of years ago when the party invested heavily in voter registration. We've seen massive voter registration increases with Republicans in these swing states. Arizona went from 120,000 advantage to 300,000 advantage in this election cycle. Very similar increases in Pennsylvania. So when you have more registered Republicans to turn out, it advantages you at the front end. Then on top of that, I do think Jeannie's got a good point. I don't think the Republicans that support Donald Trump need a lot of effort. They are low propensity voters. In other words, they don't show up to vote in every election. So they're a questionable group, but they show up when Donald Trump's on the ballot, and that's what got undercounted in 2016 and 20.
We'll find out about 2024. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature political panel, thank you, and we'll have more with them in the next hour of Balance of Power. But just ahead, we'll speak with Democratic Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois. He'll be with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We'll call it a special edition. Happy Election Day. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons, and it's great to have you with us here as we work our way through the stages leading up to actual vote counting, polls closing a bit later on. Of course, our special coverage will start 5 p.m. Eastern time, and we're here for the duration. Kaylee, we're talking so much about the horse race, about the states, about lanes. We have to remember the issues in this campaign. Based on our polling, the economy is still number one. But remarkable, especially in the last drop we got from Siena and the New York Times, abortion creeping up to challenge the economy in some constituencies as the number one issue in this election.
Well, and an important reminder that abortion is on the ballot in 10 states today, including states like Florida, for example, where we're watching a Senate race that is perhaps tighter than expected. And it is, of course, the first presidential election that we are seeing since the Dobbs decision and the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And it raises the question specifically of what kind of turnout driver it will be, considering the force we saw it to be in the midterms in 2022 and in special elections that have followed.
We know that this is an issue with a lot of potency. It's unquantifiable what the impact will be on the outcome. as we heard both campaigns lean into this issue on this campaign cycle. Let's listen.
Who, when he was president, hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did just as he intended, and there are now 20 states with Trump abortion bans, including bans that make no exception for rape or incest.
Every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote.
Joining us now for more here on Balance of Power is Democratic Senator of Illinois, Dick Durbin, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, happy Election Day. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm not sure your degree of confidence at this hour of Kamala Harris's ability to win this election, but if she does so, to what extent do you think the Dobbs decision in the Supreme Court will have played a role in that?
I think it's a major factor. I can just tell you, it motivates not just women to vote for Kamala, but a lot of men are joining in the ranks. And I see it with younger voters, too. They look at the actual cases of these women facing miscarriages, trying to find competent physicians in states where there are criminal penalties being threatened, and they understand that they don't want to be in that position. It doesn't sound like America to them, and it doesn't sound like it to me either.
Well, how are you feeling about things going into this Election Day, Senator? You've had a couple of them in your career. Illinois is not a swing state. It's not going to be one of the states likely to decide the balance of power in Washington, on Capitol Hill, or the next president. So where are you looking?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm looking for, and I've seen it this last weekend and before. We have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of Illinois volunteers who are going into Wisconsin to help Tammy Baldwin, into Michigan to help Alyssa Slotkin, into Pennsylvania to help Bob Casey, and the bottom line to make sure that Kamala is elected president. These are real volunteers who care and are making personal sacrifices to help. I don't know what's going on the other side. There's no evidence of this similar undertaking, and you can't buy this kind of support. It's like comparing mom's apple pie to something you bought at a store. It just isn't the same thing. These folks really care, and if we do well in the blue range, the blue wall that they talk about here, I think it'll be because of this factor.
Well, as you raise the likes of incumbent Senators Tammy Baldwin and others who are facing tough re-election fights today as well, Senator, it raises the question of even if Kamala Harris is able to pull off this victory, the prevailing wisdom is that you will become a member of the minority, that the Republicans will be able to flip the Senate as they only need to pick up net 2 seats. How would Washington work in that scenario? Where are the areas for cooperation?
That's a very good question, but I'm not going to concede your point that it's going to be a Republican Senate. We need 1 or 2 breakthroughs, and I can point to the states, you can too, that are possibilities. If, God forbid, the Republicans take control of the Senate and Kamala is our president, it's going to be a matter of negotiating questions like filling vacancies in judgeships and working together. I hope we can find that common ground.
Well, how much, Senator, then, will the top of the ticket help to determine the balance of power in the U.S. Senate? When we look at some of the Senate races in the blue wall states, for instance, how close they are, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, will the presidency help to decide the balance of power in your chamber?
Well, I think you addressed that earlier in the program. Some years it appears that it helps and some it hurts. I will just tell you that those 3 senatorial candidates and many others we talked about certainly have a strong record and a strong message to bring to the voters. Kamala's put together an amazing campaign in a little over 100 days that she's been the nominee. And I think the fact that she's inspired so many volunteers to go door to door in these states is going to make a definitive difference in these Senate races as well.
Well, as we watch all of this and the issues voters will be considering as they make their choices up and down the ballot, Senator, do you feel that the Harris campaign has done an adequate job addressing all of them? We obviously have heard a lot of her argument around reproductive freedom, especially casting Trump as a threat to democracy, talking about the economy, yes, but so too has Donald Trump, who has cast a lot of blame for the last 4 years and the inflation people have experienced on her and this administration. Same goes for the border. Are those the issues that she risks losing on if that's how it turns out tonight?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. From the beginning, Kamala has made the economy the issue. That's what the voters are saying, and she's backing them up by saying that'll be a high priority in her administration. But I'll also tell you when she talks about the management style of Donald Trump. The question about the future of our democracy is at stake here. He's a candidate who's running and basically says, if I lose, it means that there was cheating and somebody stole it from me. He's stuck with that story for 4 years, the big lie. This is an even bigger lie if he does in that similar circumstance. So I think she's talking about our democracy, which is a fundamental issue at stake in this election.
Well, with that said, Senator, and based on your perch on the Judiciary Committee, Donald Trump appointed over 200 federal judges in his term. What would a Trump 2.0 mean for the U.S. judiciary?
Well, that's a good question. Under the rules of the Senate, for example, we have something called a blue slip, which means that both parties and their senators have quite a bit of say as to whether a nominee is going to move forward. So there has to be compromise in that regard. But I will tell you that Donald Trump, with the help of Democrats, had 234 nominations filled in his 4 years. We have filled 213 under President Biden and have another 20 plus on the calendar for the remainder of the year. So we can match him. I hope we do.
Well, if we consider as well the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, Senator, there is a chance the next president will have some vacancies to fill. Would President Harris have difficulty doing so, depending on what the Senate majority looks like?
Well, it is a simple majority in the Senate when it comes to filling Supreme Court vacancies. And that's why Trump was able to put 3 anti-choice justices on the court. If we're going to move forward and the circumstances you're describing with President Harris and a Republican Senate, there will have to be compromises made. It's the only way we can pass something even by majority in the Senate.
Senator, last time we sat down with you was in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention. And one of the big storylines going into the DNC was the protest vote that we saw materialize in the primaries, the uncommitted vote that Joe Biden withstood and faced in many cases from Arab American voters and others who were not happy with, many progressives not happy with the policy in Israel. Expectations for widespread protests at the DNC never materialized, though, and I wonder if you see that being a risk tonight for Kamala Harris or if this is a media narrative.
There are so many elements go into this decision-making process, but the fear at the outset was that there would be a boycott of support of Democratic candidates over Middle Eastern issues. I think once Donald Trump was articulate in his own way as to where he stood, people realize there's too much at stake to lose this race over that issue. It'll affect some voters for sure, but I think by and large we understand that Kamala Harris has a rational, thoughtful approach to this, which wants to end the conflict soon and help on the humanitarian side as quickly as possible. Any election day rituals, superstitions you want to share with us, Senator? There's a great delicatessen in Chicago called Manny's, and I'm on my way there now. I'll be every election day for the last 20 plus years. I've gone there, and I'm looking forward to corned beef sandwiches.
Well, that sounds good. I hope you have a great lunch, sir. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, we thank you as always for the time. We're also watching, of course, how markets are moving on this election day. This is a big part of the story for us here on Bloomberg. And we turn to Bloomberg markets correspondent Abigail Doolittle for more on this. You wouldn't think it was a contested election with the way the markets are moving today, Abigail. What do you think?
You wouldn't at all, given the fact that you have the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ both up more than 1%. For the S&P 500, this is the best day in about 6 weeks. We have the index at session highs. We've had more recently these small moves up and down, the churn on the uncertainty. So when we connect today's move to the intersection between business and politics, one observation could be a potential Donald Trump administration could be harsh on big tech. Big tech is driving today's move, so that might be a little bit of a nod against Donald Trump. On the other hand, when we take a look at the Trump trade over the last 3 months and basically the amount of time since VP Kamala Harris has been in the race, well, it's been doing pretty well. That tech index is higher. So again, you could have that interpretation around Donald Trump. You have the solar ETF in a nod toward Kamala Harris. But take a look at Bitcoin, take a look at DJT. Both of these are higher. So market's a little bit mixed, but that Trump trade that everybody has been talking about really pretty strong into today.
Well, as we consider these trades, Abigail, I know you always keep a close eye on volatility. That could go for both the equity market and the bond market with the MOVE index. What signals is it sending today?
It's interesting. So we do have heightened volatility. That VIX is above a 20, and that does signal uncertainty on the part of investors. Now, relative to the VIX, it's at some of the higher levels that it's been at more recently. Some could say that this is investors taking advantage of the uncertainty, candidate agnostic, that they're just trying to make money off of this volatility. However, there are some other folks on the street, including Steve Sosnick over at Interactive Brokers, who yesterday told me that he sees a lot of big institutions hedging. That's why on Monday, the put to call ratio, those bearish options versus bullish options, at the highest level since 2020. So this is not unusual for an election cycle. But right now, that VIX coming back in. So investors seem to be a little bit calm, surprisingly, on this election day.
All right,
Abigail,
Bloomberg.
what are we going to be in for tonight in the overnight session if we have no race call?
Well, if there's no race call and there's any sense that there could be a contested election, you could see the futures go very negative. Back in 2000, between, I believe, let's call it 12 a.m. of the day after election through the bottom in December, stocks down sharply. Investors don't like uncertainty. That is certainly uncertainty investors wouldn't like. And at that point, you'd probably see that VIX spike back higher.
All right, Bloomberg Markets correspondent Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much. And Joe, as Abigail talks about the kind of calm we might be seeing, I guess it raises the question of how calm everyone is feeling on this election day, keeping in mind there's not much more that can be done at this point. The arguments have been made. The ground game has been at work for months, and now it's just a matter of how many people show up and cast their vote.
Well, that's absolutely right. There's no more cramming for the test. Although it's interesting to consider the positioning for volatility in either direction. We've seen market fits in both directions. When Trump was leading or Harris was perceived to be leading, there's going to be money to be made either way. We just have no idea which one that will be.
And coming up, we're going to talk to someone who knows a lot about financial markets. In fact, he'd like to be the next chair of the Financial Services Committee if the Republicans can retain the majority in the House. Congressman French Hill of Arkansas will join us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We are live from our global headquarters in New York on this election day. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and it has all come down to this, the day of voting, although voting has been going on for weeks now in many states. More than 83 million Americans had already cast a ballot coming into today. But of course, it really does all come down to this. Not only are they choosing who they would like to see as the next president of the United States, but also choosing people to represent them in Congress. The balance of power is also up for grabs.
Yeah, we're going to be watching a lot of swing states for both presidential and down ballot races, but there are other states that are in the mix tonight, Kaylee, as you well know, that we're going to be spending time on. Ohio, Montana, we've been watching very closely. There are also some outliers that have been maybe more fun to talk about than might turn into real results. And, you know, I'm talking about Texas when I say that, something that Julie Fine has been ahead of the curve on for some time. Is Ted Cruz in danger, or is it just another media narrative? I guess we'll find out later.
Well, let's check in with Texas now. Bloomberg's Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine is joining us live from Dallas. So obviously, Julie, you warned us a long time ago that this race would be one to watch. What's the feeling like on the ground this election day about Ted Cruz's future?
Well, I mean, Ted Cruz has a very solid base here. His base is confident that he will be reelected for his third term. I must tell you, though, Colin Allred is giving him a run for the money. Literally, he outraised him, raised $80 million in this race. Now, conventional wisdom says it is difficult to win the state of Texas as a Democrat. But what they're hoping is there are more than 1.5 million new voters since Ted Cruz ran last time. I think Democrats are hoping that that can make a difference for them. But again, you know, this is a rough one for Democrats to win. They have not won statewide office in 30 years. They are hopeful. Colin Allred has run a strong campaign. He campaigned very differently than Beto O'Rourke. So tonight they do have hope that they could flip the Lone Star State with this Senate seat.
Yeah, this story has become a bit of a novelty in covering the final throes of this election, Julie. The fact of the matter is the narrative going into the voting today is that Republicans will take control of the U.S. Senate. And from your view in Texas, that wouldn't be too much of a stretch. We will also go into, in that world, a new leadership battle. Of course, regardless of who owns the Senate, knowing that your own John Cornyn in the state of Texas is in the running to be the next Republican leader.
You know, I spoke to Senator Cornyn. He was actually in Dallas last week. He was at an event, and I asked him, I said, listen, you know, you are running for a new position. Is there any chance for bipartisanship after what we've seen recently? Because you know people will be looking at him for that. And he says there are issues that he thinks there can be agreement on. Now, I mean, it's been no secret John Cornyn interested in leadership for some time. He's been campaigning with other Senate candidates. He spent some time with Ted Cruz here as well. So he is definitely interested in that position and hopeful.
Well, and then there's a giant question around the leadership in the House, Julie, considering it may be that the Republicans lose the majority and become a minority, and then therefore the future of the current speaker, Mike Johnson, is very much in question.
Yeah, it's very much in question. I mean, you just spoke about it earlier. The balance of power may very well shift. It may be the same balance of power, but the House will be taken over by Democrats. This is something that Democrats have high hopes about, especially you're looking at some of the races in New York, the race in Nebraska and California. They have hope that they can flip those seats and do it to maintain the balance of power in the United States Congress.
You said it. Bloomberg's Julie Fine. Thank you so much, Julie, for setting us up with our eyes on Texas. And we widen our lens now with Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas. Congressman, it's great to see you. Happy Election Day. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. You've been living on the road a bit lately, helping to campaign for Republican candidates in New York, in Michigan, Ohio, and California. Give us your view from the ground.
Well, Joe, Kaylee, great to be with you. Happy Election Day. Look, our candidates are being outspent dramatically, but they have outstanding resumes. They're working hard, and they have terrific ground games. And I'm seeing President Trump do well in his polling in some of these key swing districts in those states, Michigan, Ohio, upstate New York, California. So while we have some tough races around the country, I think we're in a position to actually pick up seats net. And so I'm looking forward to a victory over the next few days. I don't say tonight because I think we've still got to count votes in this country, and that's tough.
Well, Congressman, as you consider the prospects of retaining the majority, is that a prerequisite for that Donald Trump winning the presidency? Do you think Republicans can keep hold of some of these contested seats with a Kamala Harris victory?
Hey, great question. But, you know, we picked up seats in 2020 when President Trump lost and President Biden was elected. We picked up seats in 2022. And that's because we have great candidates running in both red and blue districts in both red and blue states. And our majority in 2022 went through our candidates in California and New York. I think we'll hold those seats. I think we could even pick up a seat or two in those locations. And then look at Scranton, PA, a hard-fought battle up in northeast Pennsylvania. That's a shot where I think we could pick up a seat if President Trump does well there. So if President Trump has a big night tonight, I think it would expand the Republican majority. But I have confidence in the hard work, financing, and ground games of our candidates to do well in this closely contested presidential race.
We usually spend time talking with you about monetary and fiscal policy and your broader view on the economy, Congressman, when you're with us with, of course, your background as a banker and your service on the Financial Services Committee. I want to talk about the closing arguments from these two candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, the rhetoric that we've heard and the perceptions about the way they would handle the economy. Here's a taste.
Build an opportunity economy.
You would have a surplus.
Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit.
They started spending money like drunken sailors. They spent so much money, it was so ridiculous.
I will make it a top priority to bring down costs and increase economic security.
There's tremendous waste, fraud, and abuse in our country. We're going to bring companies and jobs in at levels that you've never seen.
When the middle class is strong, America is strong. We will lower the cost on everything from health care to groceries.
Congressman Hill, if expectations are right and we have a split Congress, what could be a Democratic-led House and Republican-led Senate, are we not overstating the impact that the executive has on the overall economy?
Well, we've had that for years where both voters and I think some presidents think they have way too much influence over the whole direction of a $30 trillion economy. But here's the bottom line is that when you look at households in America, 50% of households, by many estimates, are worse off than they were in January 2021. The cost.
Seems like we're having a little bit of difficulty with Congressman Hill's connection there. We'll work on that. But, Joe, it of course is a conversation we've been having for months now as we've assessed, for example, the estimates from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget about what would happen to the deficit under these different economic proposals. Could be north of $15 trillion in their median estimate under what Donald Trump has proposed when it comes to the bevy of tax cuts that he says he would offset using higher tariffs.
Yeah, and of course, look, Donald Trump is going to need Congress to get a lot of his tax proposals through tariffs he can probably handle on his own, at least to some extent through executive action. Kamala Harris's entire economic agenda would ride on a sympathetic Congress, and no one is predicting that right now.
Well, that's certainly true. So we go back to a member of Congress now, Congressman French Hill of Arkansas, still with us. Sorry about the technical difficulty, Congressman, but you were just making the point of the difficulty of getting a lot of these campaign promises to become reality when you don't have complete control of both chambers. So of all of the rhetoric we have heard from both candidates on the campaign trail, their ideas about taxes and the like, what is likely to happen through a bipartisan solution, no matter who is in control?
Well, I think members of Congress have to recognize in both political parties that a 6% annual budget deficit is too high. We have to work with the executive branch to bring down that spending like drunken sailors that was referenced by former President Trump. That should be a top priority, and preserve the growth features in our tax code. The Democrats and Vice President Harris are proposing huge tax increases. I don't think that's how we sustain economic growth, which is an essential feature to balancing our budget. We have to have economic growth.
So what are you watching tonight, Congressman, as you take a look across the country? As we already mentioned, you've been on the ground in some of these states. A lot of people don't think that we will know which party controls the House of Representatives for days. Are you among them?
Well, I think you have some states where it's going to be hard to count the votes in a speedy way, like California, for example. But that's one place where I'm watching closely. The race to replace former Congresswoman or retiring Congresswoman Katie Porter in Orange County. Scott Ball is the Republican candidate. He has an outstanding ground game. He's worked hard. He narrowly lost to her last time. And the Democratic candidate he's up against this time is a flawed one. So I'm looking at Scott Ball as a potential pickup in the California races. And I think our candidates, from Young Kim to Michelle Steele to Mike Garcia to Ken Calvert to David Valadao to John Duarte, are all positioned to win in California, that blue state. And I really think that's the case in a number of locations around the country.
So clearly, Congressman, you are confident that the majority, you will stay a member of the majority. Does that mean that Mike Johnson will stay as House Speaker? There obviously will be a leadership election in quick succession once all of these results are in. What is the fate of him and the other members of Republican leadership?
I've never seen a leadership team work harder. Mike Johnson, Steve Scalise, Tom Emmer, Elise Stefanik, they've just done an outstanding job crisscrossing the country. Hundreds of meetings, all 50 states campaigning for our candidates. If we win tonight, like.
Looks like things might be a little sticky in Arkansas. That's just the way it goes here. While we're talking live with some of our experts, we'll see if we can reconnect with Congressman French Hill. It's interesting, Kayleigh, to hear from somebody who's actually been with the candidates.
Yeah.
There are a lot of assumptions that are made based on polling and people looking from the bubble in Washington, D.C. It's also part of his job to express confidence. But, you know, the way these races break in California will have a lot to do with who controls the House.
Yeah, and as we've been reminding our audience, it is the California races that ultimately could take the longest to call, not only because of the geographic location on the West Coast. The polls will close later tonight than a lot of the country just by nature, but also the way in which the degree to which Californians vote by mail, for example, could really escalate the time it takes in order to get get all those ballots counted, knowing that according to most poll watchers, or at least balance of power watchers, including the likes of the Cook Political Report or Sabato's Crystal Ball, really think there's only a handful of true competitive races. What, 22 to 26 is the range?
Right, about 1 in 10 here. And greetings to our balance of power watchers as well here on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's counterintuitive, though, because we're not talking about swing states, really, when it comes to the House. We're talking about the two bluest states, really, that we have, New York and California. And within them, we have Republicans sitting in districts that were won by Joe Biden. So that's going to be the big test tonight when we're looking at East Coast closings. The New York delegation will be a big part of that. A couple of races in Virginia as well that we might use as bellwethers. Well, we won't be able to call the House for some time. Bellwethers maybe about where the direction of momentum are going.
Yeah, a reminder that all 435 seats in the House of Representatives are up for grabs tonight. The number is obviously smaller for the Senate, 34 Senate seats, and it's really just 11 that we are watching. A lot of them, as we have mentioned, do also overlap with the battleground states we are watching for the presidential election, but there are others we are watching as well, including the Texas race we were just discussing with Julie Fine, Florida, where abortion and marijuana measures are on the ballot as well, which could put the incumbent Republican Rick Scott in a bit more danger than was previously expected. And you also have to look at Nebraska. A reminder to everyone, Nebraska is not a state that should be slept on tonight, in part because the blue dot, one congressional district in Nebraska that does allocate electoral votes based on congressional district, will be required, along with the blue wall, for one path of Kamala Harris to the presidency. But the other thing to watch in Nebraska is the Republican incumbent, Deb Fischer, up against Dan Osborne.
Exactly.
An independent.
It's been a great race to watch.
Yeah.
Unfold. And that's going to take some time as well. Where the candidates are, we're following them. We already saw Donald Trump dropping a ballot a bit earlier this hour. That's where we started our coverage today, where he was voting in Palm Beach. Donald Trump will be at an election night watch party in West Palm Beach, Florida. They're at the convention center tonight. He'll come from Mar-a-Lago to the convention center. Kamala Harris is in the nation's capital, which is pretty unusual for a presidential candidate to be holding a rally there. But she'll be at Howard University, and we will bring you the sights and sounds of these two election night headquarters in our special coverage later on Bloomberg.
Yep, and of course, all the while, we are watching financial markets as well on this election day that don't seem to be too bothered by the uncertainty we still have at this time. The S&P 500 up 1.2% at 5780. The NASDAQ 100 is up by about 1.5 percentage points. The 10-year yield up by about 6 basis points. We still have much more to go here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Plenty more ahead in the second hour of Balance of Power. We'll be joined by Martin Luther King III and Arndrea Waters King of the Drum Major Institute next here on Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from New York.
From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. It is Election Day. It all comes down to this as we watch to see if Donald Trump or Kamala Harris will be elected the next president of the United States. And it's a reminder to us all, Joe, that regardless of the outcome and how long it takes us to figure out what the outcome is, history could be made today. Either we have the 45th president also becoming the 47th president, becoming just the second president in history to serve 2 terms non-consecutively, or the U.S. could elect its first female president of the United States, and a woman of color at that.
That's why we're here, and it could take some time for us to figure this out. Of course, we're not only talking about the presidential campaign, we're talking about the House and Senate. And based on our most recent history with voting, knowing that more than 80 million Americans have cast ballots, it could take some time to get there. But yes, it is Election Day. Happy Election Day, and thank you for spending part of it with us. We're going to have coverage straight through polls closing and races being called. That means no more campaigning, no more speeches. The candidates' closing arguments have been made.
My message to Americans tonight is simple. We do not have to live this way. We do not have to settle for weakness, incompetence, decline, and decay. We can fix every single problem our country faces and lead America, and indeed the whole world, to new heights of glory.
Look, the race is not over, and we must finish strong
So listen, here's the thing about the hard work. We like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work is joyful work. And make no mistake, we will win.
And we know that both candidates have been hard at work in the 7 battleground states that will ultimately decide the outcome of this election over its final days of the campaign. And we go now to one of them. Bloomberg's Anna Edgerton is with us from Raleigh, North Carolina. Anna, obviously North Carolina, a state that we have seen a lot of change in from 2020 to 2024. Is a state that hasn't gone for a Democrat in the last several election cycles. What's the feeling like on the ground?
Well, of course, we are waiting for those results tonight. That's the big news that everyone is waiting for. I just spoke with Karen Brinson Bell. She's the executive director of the State Board of Elections. And she gave us a bit of a timeline on what to expect as we watch results roll in. She said polls are set to close at 7:30. If there were any issues at individual polls, there would be the option to extend those hours. She said that doesn't look like it'll be the case at this point. She said she expects 98% of votes to be counted tonight, and that should be enough for networks to make calls if the results are clear. If the results are close, she cautioned that we could be in for days of waiting for a result from North Carolina.
Just have a headline crossing the terminal that we should mention here, Kaylee. This is coming from Axios. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, knowing that they did not agree on a lot of the actions in Gaza, or for that matter, to the northern border. This is something that we are just now getting an official statement on. Benjamin Netanyahu firing his defense minister. Of course, our policy in Israel, the Biden administration's policy, that of the United States, has been a major factor in this campaign. And in North Carolina, as we spend time with Anna Edgerton, so too has been the scandal surrounding the lieutenant governor. There's a lot of talk about ticket splitting there, Anna. Will that be the narrative tonight?
Yeah, and North Carolina voters have split their tickets in the past. I heard from Josh Stein last night. He's the Democrat who's running against Mark Robinson, the Republican candidate for governor, and he's very confident at this point that Democrats will retain the governor's mansion. Although he supporters implored Democrats to get out and vote down ballot. They really want to break the Republican supermajority in the legislature because that would give Democrats a little bit more of a leeway to use that Democratic governor to set policy.
Anna, thanks for being with us. Bloomberg's Anna Edgerton live in North Carolina as we turn now to Georgia. And of course, another important swing state. Our Atlanta bureau chief, Brett Pulley, joins us now for more. Brett, this is going to be one of the biggest prizes, of course, in the country when it comes to the swing states and certainly along the East Coast. What are you hearing on the ground today?
All right. Well, the latest that we're hearing, a little while ago, the Secretary of State here made a statement. He updated us on the election and also assured people that there were 2 earlier bomb threats. And he said that those were, they think, Russian hoax, and related to a Russian hoax, I should say, and that those polls have reopened. The Secretary of State also said that he expects all votes to be counted by 8 p.m. at about 99% by that time. There's a new rule here in the state that requires that all the precincts have the voting completed within an hour of the polls closing at 7 p.m. So if all goes accordingly, we could very well know who's won here in Georgia, certainly earlier than we did in 2020.
Well, and of course, that would be something that really could shift the trajectory of the night as Georgia brings with it 16 electoral votes. Could be a critical piece in the puzzle as they race to 270 here. Brett, walk us through the specific areas and demographics we should be looking at in Georgia this evening. Where are you going to be eyeing for signs of high turnout among different groups of voters?
Well, you know, clearly a big prize here is Fulton County. That's where Atlanta is situated. It's also the biggest metropolitan area in the state. And then some of the other areas such as Macon, Savannah, Augusta will be big indicators. But, you know, this time around, it was very interesting. Both candidates made sure that they spent time in some of the state's rural areas as well. The Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, typically the Democratic candidate, has not spent a lot of time outside of those urban areas. This time she did, so there was opportunity there. And the former president as well spent a fair amount of time in Fulton County and some other areas, heavily focusing advertising on men in those areas, black men and white men. And so I think he saw opportunities in some areas that typically he may not have ventured into. You know, really since 2016, former President Trump has not fared that well here. Of course, he lost in 2020, and then after that, famously, allegedly asked to fine 11,000 votes, which led to criminal indictments. And then, of course, Georgia is also the place where President Biden had his meltdown during the debate, which led to Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. So Georgia's a big prize.
Indeed. Thank you for covering it for us on this election day. Bloomberg's Brett Poley, we appreciate it. And we do just want to reiterate the breaking news we have gotten as it pertains to the Middle East. According to Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu's office, he has fired the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. According to a statement, Netanyahu said there were significant gaps between him and Gallant over the ongoing war in Gaza. They tried but failed to bridge those gaps. And Netanyahu said the enemies benefited from the gaps between him and the defense minister. It will remain to be seen how this alters the course of Israel's ongoing war with Iranian proxies, Joe. But of course, this is a feature in this election as well, an issue that has plagued specifically those on the Democratic ticket. First Joe Biden, and now, of course, Kamala Harris, as we watch to see how this affects the Arab American and Muslim American vote, especially in key battleground states like Michigan.
That's right. Look, it's going to be interesting to see if that uncommitted vote materializes this evening in those areas, knowing this dogged Joe Biden on the primary trail. Obviously, Kamala Harris did not go through the primary cycle, but she's been continually interrupted by hecklers at her events, pro-Palestinian protesters. We'll see if that becomes a reality in the voting.
Yeah, and of course, that's just one of the demographic groups we are paying attention to. There are many others as well, some of which Brett Poley were just touching on, including in states like Georgia, black voters and black men in particular. This is, of course, something that Kamala Harris was questioned about earlier on in this cycle when she was interviewed by journalists at the NABJ.
I think it's very important to not operate from the assumption that black men are in anybody's pocket. Black men are like any other voting group. You got to earn their vote. So I'm working to earn the vote, not assuming I'm going to have it because I am black.
Joining us now for more from Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. bureau, our two special guests, Martin Luther King III, chairman of the Drum Major Institute and son of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Arndrea Waters King, president of the Drum Major Institute. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here on Bloomberg on this election day. Martin, if I could just begin with you. Kamala Harris has not, throughout her campaign, leaned into the historic nature of her candidacy. Not only that she would be a woman potentially elected president, but a black and South Asian woman at that. What does it mean to you as you have spent so much of your life fighting for equality?
Well, I think it demonstrates that people are very concerned about the issues, not necessarily the ethnicity. And the fact that we've had a black president and not a woman, that is extraordinarily important. However, I think staying on the issues is what people, how is my life going to change under your leadership? And I think she's demonstrated what she intends to do if she becomes president of the United States.
Arndrea, do you agree? Because the potential to make history is very compelling to some voters here when you back off this race. That's been a major backdrop since Kamala Harris reached the top of the ticket. Or is it, in fact, kitchen table issues that drive people today?
I think it's a combination of both. Obviously, as a black woman and as the mother of a black daughter, it is something that we are extremely proud of to have the vice president, hopefully soon to be president, heading our country. Also, we're also at a time when women have progressively lost rights. And so I think that you're seeing women coming together and standing together. And in fact, we really might be the deciding vote in this election today.
Well, it certainly could be women that ultimately make or break this thing for Kamala Harris. It all, though, will depend on turnout, and that is what both of these candidates, Arndrea, have been really fighting for in the final stretch here. Are you confident that voters are going to be getting off the couches and participating in this election?
Absolutely. We have spent so many weeks and months ourselves out with the canvassers. We were just in North Fulton on Friday. And I'll tell you, the excitement that we are seeing is something that since the announcement of this candidacy up until now is something that's continuing to grow. And we saw that in the numbers of early voting, certainly in Georgia, breaking records. And we also are seeing that in early voting around the country. I do think that we're going to continue. That will uphold today.
Mr. King, I wonder your thoughts over the past couple of months, some of the rhetoric that we've heard on the campaign trail. We just opened with comments that Kamala Harris made before the NABJ. Donald Trump had some comments to the NABJ as well that questioned her racial identity, and it's a narrative that he has pushed through the course of this cycle. Some have called it corrosive, some have called it dated, some say it doesn't matter. What do you think?
Well, I think that it should be irrelevant, the ethnicity, again, of a person. It should be. We maybe haven't gotten there with some people, but as it relates to, black men specifically, black men, I believe, are going to support overwhelmingly the candidacy of the vice president to help her become the president, along with a vast coalition of others.
But Donald Trump has spent a great deal of time vying for the vote of black men and talking about how he is doing better with them than Republicans have in the past. And considering, Mr. King, that you said issues are ultimately what matters here, what issue is it that there is a disconnect with at least some black men and Kamala Harris and the ideas she has put forward?
So I think when you talk about the prospect of supporting small and disadvantaged businesses, when you talk about getting a loan that might be forgivable. I think when you talk about the fact that reducing prices, I mean, black men, like every man, wants to be able to take care of their families. Every woman wants to be able to take care of their families. And when you talk about these bread and butter issues, I believe there is an opening there. There is support. I just think that at the end of the day, the vast majority of black people are going to be supportive of the vice president.
May I also add, we also are talking about someone who said that he won the last election. And we also are talking about someone who said that he had audiences, the largest in inauguration history, or audiences that were larger than the March on Washington, no matter what photo evidence stated to the contrary. So let's talk about the facts when they come out. Let's not necessarily take Donald Trump at his word.
Well, Arndrea Waters King, tell me how you would describe then some of the racial rhetoric that we've heard on the campaign, culminating with that massive Trump rally at Madison Square Garden that had jokes that we couldn't tell on the air.
Not only jokes that we wouldn't tell on the air, those are things that we teach our children that are wrong. I worked for many years monitoring hate groups and hate crimes such as the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, and skinheads. And it is very alarming for me to see the very rhetoric that we were researching at the time actually now being said from the annals of some of the highest levels and of power in our land. And also to not only see this type of these words that are being said, but also seeing those things being passed into laws. So it is very troubling, which is why I think that we're going to see, and we have seen, such a strong standing for unity in this country, for a path forward, for turning that page on the hate and divisiveness of the past.
And let me add one thing, because the question is, what is sustainable? Most people understand when we are building a world of peace and justice and righteousness, if you're advocating vitriol, it is not sustainable. My dad would say, we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence. We don't want to face that. We're going to face building what my father and mother would say is the beloved community.
Well, and so much, sir, of what they were fighting for was the right to vote. And obviously, many more people, in part because of their work, do have the right to vote today. But given in the lead up to this election, some of the legal action we have seen, questions around who can and cannot be purged from voter rolls this close to an election, how ballots can be counted, which ballots are valid if there are mistakes. Do you have concerns about the right to vote being rolled back for at least some segments of the population?
I certainly always have concerns. I've always wondered why we purge people from voting, but yet we can drive as drivers forever, and you're never removed from the driving roles, if you understand the analogy. The fact is, you may not vote 1 year or 2 years, but you shouldn't be removed. You still have that right, but yet we orchestrate the kind of results that we want to see. And I think those who say, let's support the John Lewis voting rights bill, which all people need, not any one ethnic group. That's the right course. And the hope is that Kamala Harris wins, and in fact, the legislative bodies will pass that legislation for once and for all.
Arndrea, there's an expectation that Democrats will take control of the House. Do you see some hope for the John Lewis voting rights bill in Washington if that happens?
Absolutely. We have been working for that federal legislation for years now, and we have confirmation from soon-to-be President Kamala Harris that that is something that she will push forward. I think with the power of the House behind her, that will become an ultimate reality. And, you know, that people have talked about the fact that, yes, there's been record turnouts. That does not mean that we do not need to secure federal voting rights once and for all. Our daughter has progressively lost rights since the day that she was born. The crowning achievement of voting, that was her grandparents' legacy, has been eroded. Yes, we've had great organizers, but we should not continue to fight that battle. Voting rights are birthrights and should be in this country.
I want to thank you both for an important conversation. With us in our Washington bureau, Martin Luther King III, Arndrea Waters King. Thank you for joining us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, we'll have a lot more with Michael Whatley, chair of the Republican National Committee, as part of our coverage on this election day from World Headquarters in New York. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. It's coming up next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, live from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York on this election day, which now, at least in some parts of the country, Joe, is more than halfway over. We will get the first poll closures in parts of Indiana and Kentucky at 6 p.m. Eastern time, less than 5 hours from now.
Yeah, we're counting down to results coverage, of course, special coverage here on Bloomberg TV and radio, knowing that more than 80 million Americans have already voted here. And I will tell you, despite the fact, Kaylee, that the polls are deadlocked, certainly at the top of the ticket, the market is whistling past the graveyard today. If they have anything to worry about in terms of uncertainty that follows this election night, the S&P 500 holding up 1%. The VIX is down 7%.
Yeah,
so
20
much
handle
for the volatility.
I guess we'll wait and see what tomorrow brings,
That's right.
because that's when we're likely to get some real news about how this thing is going.
Well, exactly. And of course, we're going to be tracking the swing states here this evening. One of the first that we'll be watching on the East Coast is North Carolina, Kaylee. We just spoke with Brett down in Georgia, but North Carolina is a big prize as well, and it's one that's come with some noise in this cycle.
Well, certainly, because it's not just the presidency we are watching, but importantly, a gubernatorial race in which the Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson is up against the Attorney General Josh Stein. And Robinson has been described to us by many as a problematic candidate for the Republican Party.
This is true. It's something that we talked about with Mick Mulvaney, the former acting White House chief of staff in the Trump administration, no stranger to North Carolina. Here's what he said.
Biden, where we had the highest inflation in 40 years. The bottom 50% of workers are getting crushed. I call it the 3 I's, inflation, interest rates, and immigration. And if you want more of that, then you should vote for it.
Biden wanted much higher taxes. Kamala Harris came in at 28% for tax rate for cap gains and 28% for corporation, and did not say a word and will not say a word about unrealized capital gains. And so I think she's completely different.
We'll get to what Mick Mulvaney told us, Scott Bessent and Mark Cuban there with their views of the economic proposals coming from both campaigns. And it's an opportunity now to bring in Michael Whatley. We've been looking forward to talking with the chairman of the Republican National Committee. He's with us from the Washington, D.C. area at RNC headquarters. Mr. Chairman, welcome to Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'd love to ask you, and we'll get to the situation in North Carolina and your expectations for what happens tonight. But broadly speaking, this is our opportunity to ask the chairman what he's hearing. I know you have people fanned out around the country looking at polls, looking at returns. Can you give us an update?
Yeah, what I would say is coming into Election Day, Republicans were really poised to have a fantastic day. When you look at voter registration numbers, you look at the early vote, the absentee ballot requests and returns, all of that put the Republicans in a great position to win. We had an outright lead in states like Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, and we substantially narrowed the leads that Democrats typically have going into Election Day in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So you put all of that together with a robust turnout on Election Day. That makes us feel fairly comfortable that we're going to have a good night tonight. As I told the president, you're in a good position to win on Election Day. We just have to win on Election Day.
Well, and it becomes a question of how that win would happen, Mr. Chairman. What is the path you're most confident in at this hour? Does it run through the Sun Belt or the Rust Belt?
I think you need a combination of the two. Right now, what we're seeing is a good, solid lead for the Republicans in Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina. We feel comfortable that we will be able to carry the day with those states, given our traditional, Election Day patterns. And then we would need at that point in time to just pick off one of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. We have small but durable leads in the polls in all of those states. Very solid performance during the early vote period. So we're very anxious and ready to go for those three states.
Would love to hear from the aforementioned Mick Mulvaney, Mr. Whatley, talking about North Carolina. He just got back from the state and described his trip across North Carolina, what he was seeing on the ground. Let's listen.
I drove from Raleigh, North Carolina to Charlotte this weekend through the back roads, and I got to tell you, I think you're going to see North Carolina go for Kamala Harris. I think Donald Trump is going to walk to Georgia, a win in Georgia, but may well lose North Carolina.
As the former chair of the state's Republican Party, Michael Whatley, what do you say to that?
I feel very good about North Carolina. The first time in the history of the state, Republicans actually have a lead coming out of the early vote, absentee vote period. The polling looks very, very solid. North Carolina's always been a purple state. It's always been a battleground state. It's a very tight. It was our most narrow win in 2020 for President Trump. But we do like the numbers, and we have a great team on the ground there.
We heard from former President Trump earlier today after he voted in Florida, suggesting that so far he thinks this election has been fair. He said that as of roughly noon today, Mr. Chairman, and the question is going to be what we hear from Donald Trump later on this evening. Do you expect, regardless of whether the final tally is in or not, that Donald Trump will be declaring victory by the end of tonight?
We'll just have to wait and see what those results look like.
But you're confident that he won't prematurely declare victory?
I would just have to say we will wait and see what those results look like. If we have fair, accurate, secure, and transparent elections, then we will be glad to acknowledge those and move forward.
Understood. Let's get into that for a moment, because we had a bomb threat turned out to be, according to Secretary of State Raffensperger in Georgia, a Russian hoax. What are you hearing around the country, Mr. Chairman? Is there funny business we should know about, or has this been a fair and safe election so far?
So far, so good. We obviously are very concerned about what we saw down in Atlanta, and think that the authorities took all the proper precautions to clear that voting location, conduct a sweep, realize that it was okay, and then allow voters to go back in. We also have seen, usual types of issues where a polling location didn't open exactly on time, or a machine didn't work, or ran out of ink in a toner cartridge, or something along those lines, which are going to be resolved very quickly, and we'll be able to move on with the process.
Well, and of course, as we watch the voting process play out, voters are not just selecting who they'd like to be president of the United States, but other candidates as well, including those that will represent them in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Mr. Chairman, there is only so much a President Trump could do without the cooperation of Congress. So as you look from your perch as the chair of the Republican National Committee, how are you feeling about the odds of flipping the Senate and retaining the House?
We feel very good about the Senate. At this point in time, we're going to win Montana. We're going to win West Virginia. That will give the Republicans 51 seats. We also feel very, very good about Ohio. And then you look at a combination of states in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, as well as Arizona and Nevada. Depending on what those overall numbers look like, we could have a very, very good night for the Republicans. When it comes to the House, similarly, we are in a position to be able to expand our majority there. Right now, it's a 2-seat majority. And if this election night goes as we currently are tracking, then hopefully we'll be able to pick up 4, 5, 6 seats there.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Donald Trump's been talking about you. He brought you up at a rally in North Carolina. Considering the stakes in this election, he said, you better win. I want to get this right. You better win, or you won't be able to come back here. He doesn't win. He says he won't be at RNC and he will no longer be in North Carolina. He'll be looking for a job. I know that there's probably some joking going on there, Mr. Chairman, but what kind of pressure are you feeling today?
What I feel right now is cautious optimism. We are very upbeat about where we are. The infrastructure that we have, the campaign staff, the RNC staff have worked seamlessly together. President Trump has been out there in every single battleground state multiple times over the course of the last several weeks. We had 3 events on Friday, 3 events on Saturday, 3 events on Sunday, and 4 events yesterday. And so nobody is outworking the president. We feel very good about where we are coming into Election Day. And right now, we're very happy with what we're seeing on the ground.
All right. RNC Chairman Michael Whatley, thank you so much for joining us on this Election Day. We appreciate your time, sir. And as we hear confidence from the Republicans, we also heard yesterday some confidence from Democrats, specifically Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts was on this program, Balance of Power, saying that he fully expects he will become a member of the majority.
I think Democrats are going to take back the House. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. Neither party would claim that at this point because of how polarized the country is right now. But I do think that Republicans' dysfunction in the 118th Congress, in which they had multiple rounds of infighting over their speaker choice, in which they brought the country to the verge of a debt default, in which they had to be really bullied into funding our allies, I think is going to speak to the swing voter in those 24 seats that are going to decide the majority, and it's going to give Hakeem Jeffries the gavel.
For more, we're joined now by a representative from the state that could help make or break the House majority, New York. Republican Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of New York is with us now. So, Congresswoman, obviously we're seeing both sides projecting confidence on this Election Day. Perhaps that is not surprising. But when you look at your colleagues in your state in particular, how are you feeling about how tight these races have been coming in to Election Day? Are we going to see seats flip this evening?
Look, I think that every New York Republican has the good opportunity to keep their seats. I think that we're all going to make it through at the end of the day. But yes, some of these races have been extremely tight because they're in districts that Biden had won previously. I think the momentum that you're seeing, though, here in New York is in the Republican favor. Why? Because people are fed up with the one-party Democrat rule that has been so destructive in New York. Everything from high taxes to congestion pricing to the mass illegal migration, billions of our tax dollars being used to house gang members in luxury hotel rooms while they wreak havoc on our city. I think people have had enough, and if they've had enough, they need to send a strong message, not just to Kamala Harris, but to Chuck Schumer and to Kathy Hochul and to Mayor Adams. This is the day to do that.
Well, what is it about New York? When you look at some of the different districts that are at play here, Congresswoman, and happy Election Day, by the way, whether it's Lolota, Lawler, D'Esposito, the 4th district, Joe Biden won in 2020 by 14 percentage points. Are you suggesting that New York voters prefer gridlock in Washington?
No, what I'm saying is that even though those districts were won by President Biden 4 years ago, they were flipped to Republican 2 years ago because people were unhappy with the direction that the Biden-Harris administration were taking the country. They're not happy that this administration chose to issue 60 executive orders that completely dismantled our border, that under their rules, that Customs and Border Patrol agents are being directed to release people into our interior.
Then why are these races toss-ups? Shouldn't they be leading their Democratic rivals?
So again, they're toss-ups because again, these are districts that historically were Democrat districts that we flipped. So it's always going to be a tight race, and I think that you'll see these members prevail. I even think we could flip a seat in the Hudson Valley with Allison Esposito, who has a 20-year career with the NYPD. She ran with as lieutenant governor with Lee Zeldin 2 years ago, where a gubernatorial ticket in New York State getting 40% of the vote. That tells me that New York is a purple seat. Purple state. We just need the people to vote at the maximum possibility. And we still don't see 100% voter turnout, right, in New York. And I think showing how close those races were 2 years ago, where we flipped some seats, we delivered the majority for the House, and Lee Zeldin came so close to becoming elected governor, I think was a wake-up call for people that your vote truly does matter in New York and that we are a purple state, not a blue state, as they say.
Well, so as we consider the outcome of the vote here, obviously, without knowing it at this time, we are looking ahead to next week when the Republican conference in the House will be having leadership elections. Congresswoman, how could the architecture of Republican leadership look different if it's the majority still or becomes the minority? What happens to Speaker Mike Johnson, for example?
So look, if we have the majority, I believe all of our leadership stays in place. If you're in the minority, then you lose a spot. And then that may be some shuffling that you would see going on. But I think that we're on track to keep the majority and expand our majority. I think it will be a small expansion of the majority, but we will keep the majority nonetheless, because people know that we're the ones who did the work, right? We passed legislation to actually secure the border, to reverse the anti-energy policies that have driven up inflation, the cost of food and energy in America. We're the ones who have been the ones that have really put a check into government spending. No more of these crazy omnibus massive bills that added trillions when the Democrats had control in the first 2 years. So I think that people want to see a balance, and particularly here in New York, and having a House majority does give us some sense of balance when we have Democrats controlling everything from the city council to the state legislature to all 4 spots in our statewide office.
If you keep your majority in the House, Congresswoman, and Mike Johnson remains your speaker, presumably in that world, would you work to repeal the CHIPS Act that was passed and pushed by the Biden administration, later passed by Congress?
Yeah, so the CHIPS Act had some issues with it. I don't think it needs to be repealed. I think it could be adjusted to make sure that all of the incentives are being used here in the United States. And one of the other issues with the inflation, they called it the Inflation Reduction Act. We called it the Inflation Expansion Act. That bill too also gave a lot of incentives that ended up in communist China for EV batteries, and then subsidized slave labor and child labor in the Congo. So I think there needs to be some adjustments to make sure that these things are actually being made here in the United States. I have similar legislation to the CHIPS Act that would incentivize production of pharmaceuticals here in the United States, which we desperately need because 80% of our pharmaceutical ingredients are coming from communist China and overseas. So I think the incentives to bring chips and all those sensitive supply chains home is important. If we can alter the legislation to make it better, then we should look at that. But certainly, I want to see these products being made here in the United States.
Congresswoman, great to have you back. Nicole Malliotakis of New York, thanks for being with us on this Election Day on Bloomberg TV and radio. As we reassemble our signature panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, Republican strategist at the table here in New York, alongside Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, our Democratic strategist. Great to have you both back. We just heard from 2 Republicans, Rick, the chair of the RNC, and of course, Congresswoman Malliotakis just there speaking pretty optimistically about the House. That's going against the narrative, though, isn't it?
Well,
the New York Congresswoman, and she's right in the middle of ground zero. I mean, between New York and California, we can either sustain the Republican majority in the House or lose it. And so I think she's right about the idea that Republicans are getting stronger in New York, not weaker. We see a lot of trends toward even New York upping their vote for Donald Trump. There's all this talk about Donald Trump actually having as many popular votes as Kamala Harris, and that's not because of the targeted states. That's because of him doing better in places like California and New York. So that has to benefit our Republican down ticket members, too. So, yeah, I think that the House is probably going to be one of the most closely watched races tonight. The Senate seems baked for Republicans, but obviously all eyes are always on the presidential campaigns.
Well, and if you're considering where the market's eyes have been, Jeannie, by and large, they've been betting on divided government, that no matter who wins the presidency, there's going to be opposite parties controlling the House and the Senate. But if Republicans are feeling confident in New York and elsewhere, is there a likelihood that we could end up with a red sweep? If Trump wins the presidency, could he bring the House along with him?
It is certainly possible. And, you know, we simply don't know at this time. But I do think that if you look, I agree with Rick on the Senate. It looks like that is going to go in the Republicans' direction. I think Democrats could take the House. It's going to be very close. I also don't think we are going to know for a few days, if not a week, because a lot of these competitive races are out in California, as Rick mentioned. We've also got one in Alaska. We've got the 5 in New York that are very competitive. So I don't know if you should be betting, if you're in the markets right now, that we're going to have a unified government. I think we can't forget that all of these projections are based on polling, and so they are subject to error, whether it's non-response bias, whether it's the way in which we as pollsters figure out who we're going to model to turn out. You know, these are all things that are subject to error. So that's what makes it exciting for all of us, but I wouldn't place money yet on a red sweep.
We talked to the chairman, Michael Whatley, a short time ago about potential paths to victory for Donald Trump. When Kayleigh asked, is it the Rust Belt or the Sun Belt? He said it's a combination. Isn't that the answer for both?
Yeah, I think that's what they want it to be, right? Yeah. Nobody wants to be pinned down. But, like, first thing that's going to happen tonight is we're going to get a peek into North Carolina and Georgia. Now, that's really important because, one, two key swing states. But, two, if either one of these candidates win both those states, and we'll know pretty soon tonight whether or not that's going to happen because they both have polls that close at 7 o'clock and at 7:30, it then gives them an option to lose Pennsylvania. If you lose Pennsylvania, you have to have North Carolina and Georgia to make up the electoral votes that you need. So if they split, that's another problem for anybody. Then it's like you got to win Pennsylvania to be the nominee. So I think that this will be the first time we see a real gelling of the strategy. Which path are you going to have access to walk down?
Well, and it's not just North Carolina and Georgia that the campaigns have told us to brace for almost full results from. It's Michigan as well, which does raise the question of whether or not we will have a sense before all of the states are in, Jeannie, as to whether or not there is still an open path for either of these candidates. Assuming, though, that someone doesn't win all 3 of those, and this could take days, what are you expecting the language will be from both of those candidates when they go speak at their parties? I won't call them victory parties or anything, but in D.C. and down in Florida, what are they going to say if it's still too close to call?
You know, I have my hope of what I hope they would say, which is let our fellow citizens that are running these polls count the ballots. I don't have confidence that that's what we're going to hear from Mar-a-Lago. The former president has already talked about the fact that if he doesn't win, then it will mean this thing was rigged and it was stolen. And, you know, he came out today. One thing I agree with him on is I think once this is over, we have to have a concerted conversation in this country about how to count ballots and administer our elections. Our friends in Europe do it much faster, much better, much less expensively. I mean, I could go on, you know, you know, I think we should look over there. Let's look at Florida. They count fast. There is no reason, the president is right, former president, in this country in 2024, we can't get our administration in better shape. So I think that's what we should focus on. But for today, I think we should say calm. Let's let our friends friends that are running these polls have the time they need to count.
Yeah, well, to hear from the Secretary of State in Georgia about a bomb threat, talking about a Russian hoax, he said, is what was really going on there. We talked about that with the RNC chair as well. Reminds us of how on edge a lot of people are about the way this is being executed today. That's a good moment, though, isn't it? When the Secretary of State comes out and says, no, this has been handled. This is a hoax.
Yeah, it's a good moment when the Secretary of State says that, but it's even better when Chairman Whatley of the Republican Party says, yes, the Secretary of State,
there you go.
I accept his explanation. We're all on board with that. I mean, right now, everything seems calm. We're into the first 6 hours of voting around the country. And other than some of these kind of episodes, which reminds us about the pernicious influence of foreign actors in our own elections, it seems to be a fantastic day for voting. In other words, we don't have any real problems at the ballot boxes. There haven't been disruptions. Voters aren't, saying that they're being turned away. I mean, that is a model election
Even the weather's
so far.
good.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Well, and of course, it's not just about Election Day, though, Jeannie. There's going to be other dates on the calendar we have to look forward to, including, for example, when the actual electors cast their votes on December 17th, when Congress then has to certify them on January 6th, only for the president then to hopefully be inaugurated on January 20th. So once we're all through today, whether or not we know the outcome at the end of the day, how far are we really from this thing being over?
Well, given the way we run our elections, we've got a ways to go. And, I think we can all remember before 2020 when not a lot of people paid attention to when the ballots were going to be open January 6th. And now it has become a day that we are a bit nervous about. And so it is a very big concern. I think one difference is the person currently in the White House is not running for president. So we have the benefit that somebody who is not sitting there is going to be in the White House, and unlike 2020, won't be able to go to the mall and try to send a mob to Congress.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel. Thank you. And they, of course, will be with us throughout Election Day here on Bloomberg TV and radio, including in our special edition of Balance of Power, which will begin at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. As we are here on Election Day, the final arguments have been made to American voters who are now turning out to the polls. And Donald Trump, in his closing message, had this to say to Americans.
My message to Americans tonight is simple. We do not have to live this way. We do not have to settle for weakness, incompetence, decline, and decay. With your vote tomorrow, we can fix every single problem our country faces and lead America, and indeed the whole world, to new heights of glory.
We're joined now by Democratic Congresswoman and chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Suzan DelBene. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us. It is, of course, your job to help get Democrats elected to Congress. So that was Donald Trump's message to Americans. What is your message to hopeful Democrats who are looking to flip the House today? How confident are you feeling about that prospect?
Well, our message is that we can have people who are leaders across the country who are going to govern, who are going to move our country forward, who have policy ideas to move us forward, who are going to build an economy that works for everyone, protect reproductive freedom across the country. We hear nothing but chaos and dysfunction and the extremism from the Republican side. And in the House, Republicans have been in charge and they've been incapable of governing. So people want to see governance work in these important districts all across the country. We have great candidates. We have the resources to get their message out. We've been talking to voters. And all of that is a great reason why we'll take back the majority.
Congresswoman, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. Happy Election Day. I know you've been living on the road and not sleeping a lot as part of your charge to get Democrats elected to the House. And so I wonder if you can give a bit of a roadmap to our listeners and viewers who are going to be experiencing all of this in real time later, specifically on the East Coast, some of the bellwethers that you're going to be looking at, from the New York delegation to the couple of contested seats in Virginia, including the one that's being vacated by Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. I also look a little bit further out into the time zones here, but for Ohio, Marcy Kaptur, the longest serving woman in House history. Tell us where you're looking tonight for bellwethers that might answer the national question.
Well, first of all, remember that the map for the House is all over the country.
Sure is.
It's in New York and California and in the Pacific Northwest, all the way through Alabama, Iowa and Nebraska, Arizona and Michigan. We have races everywhere. They are all unique. These House districts are all unique. And so we are going to be looking at races all across the country. We need to net 4 more seats to take back the majority in the House. That means, winning in lots of districts across the country, keeping the seats we have. But we have great candidates running in all of these seats who are talking about the issues that the American people care about. So we will obviously get results earlier in the places where polls close earlier, like Virginia or North Carolina. But I think all of our races are a little different. I think we're in a strong position, and we're going to keep looking at those across the country. But I can tell you there's been a lot of conversation recently about places like Nebraska and Iowa. There's energy on the ground. There's 3 seats right there, 2 in Iowa, 1 in Nebraska, that are part of what could put us in the majority.
Well, as we consider the prospects for the majority in states like that, Congresswoman, which Ann Seltzer poll aside, are expected to go for Republicans at the presidential level, to what extent are you reliant this evening on split ticket voting?
Well, there are many Republicans who are tired of the extremism. They don't even recognize their party anymore. And absolutely, there are women across the country who are going to stand up to defend reproductive freedom. So I think there are definitely crossover Republican voters that we're going to see in many of our districts. These are purple districts. And people want to see strong governance. They want folks who are actually going to solve problems, get work done in Washington, D.C. Those are the candidates we have, and a good reason why I think we're going to have strong support for those candidates, and another good reason why we win.
What are you hearing from your field workers, those who are in the districts, Congresswoman, about turnout so far today?
Turnout is strong. We have just seen incredible enthusiasm on the ground across the country. I was in Iowa the last couple days. Many people turning out to knock on doors, to make phone calls. These are close races. It's very, very important that we make sure every voter realizes what's at stake this election and cast their ballot. So we've seen strong energy. We see that in early voting, and we're seeing that today. All that makes a difference because many of these races may be very close.
Well, and as we consider energy, Congresswoman, many of us during the midterms in 2022 were surprised that a red wave did not materialize, and many pointed a finger at the Dobbs decision as the reason why, the overturning of Roe v. Wade being a mobilizing factor for people across the country and women especially. Do you think that is being adequately reflected in the polling we're looking at all in all parts of the ballot, from the presidential race down to the races that you are focused on? How will abortion impact the ultimate turnout we see in the result of this election?
When we've seen abortion on the ballot across the country in elections since November of 2022, we've seen strong support to stand up for reproductive freedom all across the country in states like Kansas, Ohio, Virginia, Wisconsin. And so we are going to continue to see that today. If you look at Iowa, for example, they have a very harsh abortion ban in place, and that's been a very motivating factor for voters to turn out. We've seen women turning out in great numbers across the country, too. So absolutely, this has been an important issue and will continue to be an important issue because people are going to stand up for our rights and our freedoms, for our democracy, and for our future. Make sure we have a strong future for everyone in our country, building a strong economy. All of those are critically important, and voters are paying attention. They've seen Republicans change with their stances, try to twist their words, but they know where Republicans stand. They want to put in place a national abortion ban, and they're going to stand against that.
More broadly, though, Congresswoman, we talk so much about the presidential election through, yes, 7 swing states, but nationally, when it comes to issues, economy, abortion, border, is it different when you come to House races? How local and how granular are the issues that are driving these decisions?
Well, I can tell you the economy is a top issue in House races across the country, and folks want people who are going to govern. They've seen the chaos and dysfunction from Republicans putting us on the brink of a default, on the brink of shutdowns. Next year will be an important year for tax policy, and having sound leaders who are actually going to find solutions, move us forward is very critical. Important policies that help working families, like the expanded child tax credit, making sure that we're supporting affordable housing across the country. These are policies that Democrats have been pushing for. In fact, affordable housing can be a bipartisan policy, but Republicans don't seem interested in actually passing anything. So that's why having leaders who are focused on getting things done, making sure that we get policy through the House, through the Senate, and to the president's desk are critical to actually making a difference for our communities. Those are the folks who are running in these swing districts, our candidates, folks who are independent-minded, are pragmatic, want to make progress for our communities and our country. And when we have a Democratic House, we have the opportunity to get that done. And of course, I think we'll be doing that in conjunction with President Harris.
All right, Congresswoman, thank you so much. Happy Election Day, and thanks for being back with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Suzan DelBene chairs the DCCC, and that's a busy person right there, Kayleigh, leading up to this moment and potentially beyond it. You know, we talked about the matter of abortion as an issue. This did come up when reporters were talking with Donald Trump when he voted this morning. That referendum down there is a pretty big deal. He did not answer the question when first asked. Pressed a second time, Donald Trump said to the reporter, quote, "You should stop talking about it," unquote. We do not know how he came down on that issue.
Yeah, and of course, that is not the only ballot measure we are watching in Florida this evening. There's also one around the legalization of marijuana. And this is true across a number of states. Well, we have talked at length over the last 2 hours about the presidency, the balance of the House and the Senate. There are other decisions that will be made by voters as they head to the polls today, as they have already done in the numbers of tens of millions, if not over 100 million at this point.
Interestingly, Donald Trump said he would actually vote for the legalization of marijuana through that ballot measure as long as public consumption was controlled somehow, but was not in favor of locking people up for cannabis violations. In this case, for the abortion measure, he has said both. At one point, he said he supported it, then later said he would vote against it.
Yeah, and we'll see what kind of driver abortion on the ballot in 10 states. The abortion issue as a whole is for turnout today as we continue to watch the numbers we're getting from many states, which saw record turnout at the very beginning of voting. And of course, many Americans already voting early. We have hours still to go on this election day.
You still got a chance to vote, and join us back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, a special 2-hour election show right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.